Hey everybody, welcome to DragonCon Goes Virtual. This is the science track. We're going to be talking about what would Baby Yoda eat? All of the ins and outs of food and other weirdnesses in the Star Wars universe. I am Stephen Granade. I am the track director for the science track, and I have an incredibly amazing group of folks here to talk about Star Wars and food and Baby Yoda and frogs in mouth. So what I'd like to do is go around, have everyone introduce themselves and talk just very briefly about food in Star Wars. What gives? What's your, I guess, relationship to it or thoughts that you have? And we'll start with Danielle, if you will.
Hey, how y'all doing? I am an ecologist, so I'm thinking about this from an ecological point of view. And my relationship to Star Wars and food is, I was actually fascinated as a kid by how much they actually don't spend much time eating. So they go a long places. So I just figured they all just have really good metabolism.
Perfect. Very well evolved. In the future, you don't have to eat. That's kind of sad. We also have Tina Saey, if you will introduce yourself.
I am Tina Saey. I'm the senior writer at Science News magazine, and I am also Atin Jalou of the Mandalorian Mercs Costume Club. So, you know, I have a double relationship with the Mandalorian and the child. And my relationship to food in Star Wars is that I was completely grossed out by Luke milking that sea cow in The Last Jedi, and milk should not be green. That's all I'm going to say about that.
I'm going to put a pin in that one.
Yeah, I feel like we're going to get to like blue and green milk. That's got to be a thing we're going to talk about. All right, Stephanie?
Hi, I am a biochemist by training, actually. So the way I think of a lot of this is in the context of mechanisms in the cell. So why is the blood green? Why is their skin green? Is there something in their diet that's contributing to it? Is their diet kind of indicating something about their food sources or maybe even metabolic processes going on? Can we work backwards to get some clues? I love to think of things like that. And I love food and I love Star Wars. So it was kind of easy for me. But it was also really great to kind of work this out with a group of people instead of doing it all in my own head, which I do a lot. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
We are here for you and very excited to talk about this. And then finally, Bethany Brookshire.
Hello, I'm Bethany Brookshire. I'm the staff reporter at Science News for Students, which is science news for kids, basically. And I am by training a physiologist and a pharmacologist. So I'm also coming at it kind of from that chemistry angle, like sitting here being like, we could talk about what the food looks like, or we could sit there and say, you know, how would you create bread out of random powder and water? And I would say my personal connection to Star Wars is kind of in, you know, I too love to try alien food. That might not, you know, be considered, you know, normal to, you know, my home. For example, I have eaten things like raw horse and fermented shark. And one time I licked a banana slug to turn my tongue numb for 30 minutes. So I have an unfortunate connection to Jar Jar Binks.
I love how we have a crossover with like, I licked that for science, which is another panel that we have done in the past. Well done.
I did lick it for science. There is that.
All right, let's get into it. Baby Yoda, he's in the Mandalorian, shoving stuff in his mouth. What gives with his food?
So the one thing that when the mechanic on Tatooine asked, you know, get this kid some food, and she said, what would he eat? I don't know, maybe something with bones in it. So the things that we've seen him eat are frogs and bone broth. So she's not that far off. So I was thinking, so why does he need to eat stuff with bones in it? And for me, it comes down to his aging process. We know that when you get older, bones get weaker. And throughout your life, your bones are constantly being broken down and built back up again. It's this never-ending cycle. And kids, actually, like sort of late teenagers, is when your bones are their strongest and most dense. So I figure Baby Yoda needs to eat a lot of calcium to get his bones as strong as possible while he's young, because he's got, 900 years left to live. So he's got to do some major bone building while he's still a toddler to make it through the rest of his life.
You know what? I also, first of all, I love Amy Sedaris, and I really love her in that role. I took that because she was looking at clues like his teeth. So he has teeth, and there are all these mostly uniform, like spiky teeth, and that's some of my hints that I would take to go, he's eating meat, like he's eating some sort of animal protein because of those teeth. And your teeth tell form fits function, so they tell on you and tell what your job is. So he's used to biting something, kind of breaking it down. And whether he eats the bones or not, I wasn't necessarily thinking that, but he needed that protein that came from something that had bones.
See, I was thinking, with the pointy teeth that you pointed out, I was wondering if his natural food was fish.
Mm-hmm.
Because a lot of animals that eat fish have those, like, spiky little teeth.
Yeah.
Also, my other headcanon is that he's actually just paleo, and he's just trying to stick really hard to his paleo diet.
But that goes back to being carnivorous. Paleo was just meat, which I can talk evolutionarily why. So Stephen, you were saying that PETA put out a statement years ago about Yoda?
Yeah, about 2015, Peter was like, Yoda's vegan and you should be too.
I can run a 10-point case of why that's not.
Stephanie, you look like you got some thoughts.
The thing to me that really struck in that scene was I kind of thought about sources of heme as opposed to necessarily what are some indications in the teeth. I love the idea that we don't have a name for this species. We don't have a lot of details about the home planet. What we knew about Yoda, the original, came from, the swampy space. Like, we think of that as being a determinant of his diet and also like why he was green. But really it's interesting to see this Baby Yoda character and the fact that it too is green. It too has a long growth cycle and a long life cycle. So I was thinking more along the lines of what are some of the things that might make this species green. And I think a lot about the fact that its blood is also green, and that's an indication of if we're dealing with Earth-like physiology and biochemistries, then maybe, just maybe, it's because instead of needing a lot of heme in its blood, it actually likes a lot of biliverdin, right? And it's another compound that is converted between heme. And what's really cool about it is maybe, just maybe, he's eating bones and he's carnivorous because he gets a lot of heme from those sources. And then it's very easy for his body to convert to, again, biliverdin. It's a big word, but it's basically like another compound that functions similarly. But humans, we don't want to keep that around, right? We like to convert it and keep it as heme. But maybe he just wants the heme and the blood and the bones of certain animals. And that kind of makes life a little bit easier for him, especially since he's not eating that much.
I like that. And I also was wondering, and Danielle, you might have a thought on this as well. I was wondering if maybe people of Baby Yoda's species are kind of mesopredators because then you kind of want to be green if you're living in a swampy environment because you are a predator, but you are also prey to something else. And so you want to not be flashy and be kind of small.
Right. Well, so we don't know what the home planet is like Danielle said, because think about it, Yoda was actually hiding out on Dagobah.
Yeah.
that was not necessarily where he was from. That's just where he chose to lay low so Darth Vader wouldn't find him.
And it was such a crappy planet. It's like the lowest price one on Star Wars.
So Dagobah is the hood. You know what? It was, by those standards, if we're going to apply those standards, it was underdeveloped. It was a lot of stuff, like you lose your car,
Very poor infrastructure, no healthcare access.
You couldn't find.
And you eat what you can find.
And it's pretty much a food desert.
Yeah.
Well, and Luke's coming to move in and, try to gentrify the place.
That's so good, though. But he did straight up was rude to the local folks, like, get out of here. I'm not looking for you, but he was looking for you. Luke, I can't even get on how much. Luke is a jerk.
A whiny jerk.
Yes.
I do not disagree.
So if we're going to talk about adult Yoda and Dagobah, I think I'd be interested to hear what clues you get looking at what Yoda serves, adult Yoda, and his reaction to both what he serves and what Luke has in his little lunchbox that Mama packed for him.
Yeah, so Luke had these ration bars, and Yoda ate them, didn't like them, and he said, "You'll never grow big and strong eating stuff like this." So, he's thinking this stuff really has no nutritional value, and he whipped him up some sort of stew or soup. So I'm thinking, they're a stew culture.
Mm-hmm. Actually, that makes not only the stew culture, but I mean he's living in stew, so that makes sense that he makes stew. Everything around him is like one big stew. But like those ration stuff.
Yeah.
I was basically looking at those and going, those are MREs.
Yeah.
That's what they are.
MREs. And MREs are horrible. You know, because you have to live.
But I think, too, what's interesting about the relationship there is that stews, when you think about it, again, on what it makes biologically available, I mean, one way we could think about it is maybe there's a lot of water-soluble components that, like, we're breaking down, we're releasing those. And I'm not saying vitamin C, but all kinds of things are water-soluble. But then the other interesting part is sort of like the fiber component, and maybe like stewing things down is like a part of really breaking down those fibers and really kind of making something that's going to be nutrient-rich. Unlike, because another way to think about the rations is that they're kind of like the fast food. So they're not as nutrient rich and you're not getting good protein. They probably have a lot of fillers and all those things that we like to judge sometimes. And maybe Yoda was team natural diet.
Well, and also there's the importance in human evolution. There's a great deal of importance on cooking. In how we actually kind of evolved, because cooking and stew, which is probably one of the earlier forms of cooking because it's just kind of a no-brainer. I'm just guessing on that one. But stew makes a lot of things much more nutritionally available because the heat kind of helps start the breakdown process for a lot of those compounds.
Well, and also, so now back to from a behavioral ecology point of view. So what stew means? So you're able to take whatever scraps you make. So it works whether you have a lot of something, whether you're in plenty mode or in thin mode. Work with whatever scraps you have. They usually have a little bit of everything in it. So like you said, the fiber, break it down, the starch, the fat, water soluble. But here's the other part from a behavior point of view. You can put a stew on and then go do the rest of your business throughout the day.
Yes.
While it cooks. And so that signals that they still have to go spend their time foraging, protecting, or building during the day. And for
unless you say that a slow cooker.
Yeah, it's a slow cooker. Yeah. You put it over the fire and then you go do your business, which for the Jedi is, getting in touch with the Force and lifting things with your head.
But don't you think Yoda could use the Force to make it like an Instapot situation?
But he He could.
But I wonder though. I wonder if there's, you know, if because what I noticed played out more with Baby Yoda than with adult Yoda, right? It was that he would get kind of white after but use his powers, for lack of a better word. And I'm kind of wondering if maybe we just didn't see that with Yoda, because maybe there's like some wisdom, like, okay, I've done my thing, now I'm going to return to the middle. And where you didn't necessarily see him get exhausted, well, you did here and there, but not so much. Maybe it was just less obvious that this is a taxing thing. So maybe I don't want to use this to cook, even though one could also argue, like, when was the last time you had to use the Force by the time Luke got there? But
So if I understand the lore, so two things. Dagobah is a rich planet with force. Like the whole planet is just mainstream, main dining.
Just soaking in it.
Yeah, just please edit that out. They're like, it's just the core is full of the force, so he doesn't need to use it because it's just part of the air. The other thing that I was trying to understand right throughout the series is if you use too much force because they're in hiding, it becomes an antenna.
Yeah, because for example, Kylo Ren and what's his name? There's been an awakening.
Yeah.
They know when somebody's like contacted the Force for the first time.
Yes. So so what Yoda's doing is it's something I do. It's like, so because I live hood adjacent. So by living hood adjacent, you're able to kind of, get some things done. So no one's looking for him out there because it's a nothing planet. But then everything around it is the Force. So when he uses the Force, presumably it just hides, it becomes noise. So you won't even register that it's extra Force. And that's probably, I'm going to say that's my hypothesis of why he chose that planet. Is because he was able to hide in plain sight with the Force.
Because it's camouflage. The whole planet is camouflage for him.
Yeah, it's Force camouflage.
Yeah. I bet you that spectra, you can't see spikes in that spectra at all. You wouldn't see them.
You wouldn't see him.
I like the idea that he's hiding out, and so he like recreates gumbo. Like that's how he hides out.
There's a lot of filet on that path.
A lot of it. It's the swamp. It's just like Louisiana and Lower Mississippi.
Mm-hmm.
Yep.
Well, I was actually thinking of something that Stephani said when she talked about how Baby Yoda does get real tired. Like he uses the Force and he just like passes out.
Yeah.
And I'm wondering, like, what is the caloric burn of the Force? Is it like high intensity interval training, which means, as you become an adult, maybe you use the Force more, you become more fit. Your like Force endurance becomes stronger, but you're still probably like burning the calories, which means that like every time Luke lifts a ship, he needs a Cliff Bar. And that would also explain why at the very end of his life, Yoda becomes so tired, from using the Force and stuff, because there comes a point where like, no matter how fit you are.
Well, so back to that, that's why I think that the vegans are wrong about him being vegan. The Force takes up a lot of brain power, and your brain burns through a lot of calories. You need protein. Mm-hmm. I would say, if anything, if plant protein just ain't gonna do it. I know some people would disagree, but it just ain't gonna do it.
I'm now picturing the Jedi with a giant pile of edamame and just like...
It would just not be sustainable to get the protein you need. How much plant volume you'd have to consume, like you'll run, like that's a trade-off. Your gut can't handle that much, and then you need to digest it better. So you need some good old-fashioned animal protein.
Well, but another way to think about it though too is the cardiovascular system. And even though they're small for a really long time. And I would always be curious about like their heart, because when we think about our cardiovascular systems and our heart is beating 24/7. So it needs fuel all the time. And if there's any way that we could correlate that to Yoda and the entire species, then I'd imagine that they're needing a lot of fuel all the time for the heart to continue to beat. And then on top of that, you're going to use the Force, which is probably taxing to more than just their nervous systems. It's probably taxing to their cardiovascular system too. So I'm just kind of like, well, maybe they also are carnivorous because they need a lot of available fat, because a healthy heart is using fatty acids as its primary fuel source. So if it's comparable, then it would make sense to me that, if a frog is hopping along, I'm just going to snatch this up because you might get a decent dose of fatty acids.
And frogs are tasty.
Yeah, and I think too that might explain the stew bit also, because I think you could probably make fatty acids more available from plant sources. That I'm not an expert, but maybe it's another way of getting a lot of fat out of anything that you can find and just kind of making it readily available.
So that brings up a question I've kind of wondered about the Star Wars universe for a while, which is, it seems like there's a lot of megafauna. You've got the Rancor sitting down in the pit. You've got bantha, these giant sort of hairy, almost woolly mammoths tromping around in the desert. What gives?
Yeah, there's a lot of animals in Star Wars that have no obvious food sources, like the
tauntaun on Hoth.
A tauntaun on Hoth.
What is it eating?
Eats snow, I guess.
Yeah.
I mean, obviously the wampas eat the tauntauns, but so they're carnivores, obviously. But what does the tauntaun eat?
Well,
I mean, presumably there's no vegetative matter below that snow.
Well, so according to Wikipedia, the tauntaun is a reptile. Yeah, okay. I know. I was like, that eats lichen. Which,
Where?
cute.
Where's the lichen? Where is
Right. Just like, where's the lichen? And don't get me wrong, like, reindeer do indeed eat lichen, and they, get a lot of mileage off of that. But it's not their primary food, and it's not their primary food for a very good reason. Lichen is kind of nutritionally poor. There's just not a lot of, available carbohydrate and protein in there. And also, lichen grows super slow. Ridiculously slow. Like, you could have no kind of population on tauntauns. They would eat the planet bare. Maybe that's why there's no lichen.
Well, the thing is, I see no evidence of lichen on the planet.
You'd need rocks.
And that's not a reptile. I saw hair on it. Anybody?
Oh, yeah.
Lies.
Oh, yeah, no question.
I
A hairy snake.
Oh, why do these words mean things?
I reject this. I reject that. Send it back. I don't trust them.
Talk to me about if you've got, creatures in a snow environment like that, how does the food chain work?
It's really short.
Very short.
Yeah.
So good.
Tauntaun eats nothing. Wampa eats tauntaun. You're done.
Cannibalism in one generation.
I mean, we can talk about, I don't know anything about this, but I feel like, Danielle, you probably know a lot about, Arctic food webs.
Arctic food? So here's the thing. So what we know about Arctic food webs, they are not strictly terrestrial or aquatic. Like, they are multi-biome. And they have to be, just because in that case the sea is the richer place to find more stuff. Arctic biomes tend to be heavily carnivorous. Like, you have to eat a lot of meat. Meat is the most available nutrition out there. They build for size, so you fuel up and then you sit still for a long time, and then you just store it so you move slower. So I'm fine with the tauntaun being big. It's not a really fast animal, so it kind of hops and hobbles along. But I'm not seeing the water source to suggest that at least there's something there, or at least there's something in the sky. So there's no obvious vegetation. There's no 3D environment other than ice. I was really impressed with the Wampa's ice cave. That was a super impressive habitat it built for itself. And unless there's a whole level of life going on in those tunnels that we don't know about, which that would be on brand for the Star Wars universe, whole life.
Chemosynthesis.
We'll get another series continue.
If we can demonstrate that there's some plants down there and lichens and all that other stuff, then I'll be willing to give guys all of that, including maybe accepting that sometimes.
Also, like one thing that you said that I think is really important about Arctic ecosystems is so many of those animals like store up food and then sleep. They hibernate. They are not moving a lot. Like I wonder if tauntauns and wampas have like deep hibernation cycles, and like the people who've arrived there to make it their rebel base have like destroyed their circadian rhythms.
Absolutely. So the tauntauns are domesticated. Like they domesticated a few. Most of the tauntauns are like, this ain't our life. This ain't our ministry.
And maybe they're all like hibernating away in their own little ice cave.
But I would say they are, because look how easily the one tauntaun passed out and died from being outside for too long. Like if that's their planet, they should, because they didn't want to be out there. The tauntauns were always giving clues, like when the wampa was coming, it's like time to go.
Which makes me wonder what's wrong with the wampa, because if tauntauns are hibernating, wampas should also be hibernating. What's going on in that like wampa's life that he is not hibernating right then?
I kind of wonder. See, my question is, how many people went to go colonize this planet, and how many people are still around by the time it is a part of the story? I'm kind of wondering if that was what happened, if they just did what they needed to do.
Yeah, these infrequent disturbances have just, at least in that region. Because like meteors was falling all the time, the Empire's just throwing junk down there, just lobbing softballs. The rebels built this super impressive base inside the mountain with the big door. So they were down there for a while to build something that big. They completely jammed all that up during that time. Everything's thrown up.
Just walking.
You have the big AT-AT walkers. Those have got to be like creating like mini earthquakes every time they take a step. Yeah. And what wampa can sleep during that?
Yeah, it sounds like we're moving towards a scenario kind of like with boats and whales and whale song, where AT-ATs are entirely messing up the regular rhythm of the life on the planet.
Save the wampa! Silence the AT-AT!
So we've talked a little bit about the need to store up energy. Tina, I'm going to have to throw this to you, given the fact that you're wearing the armor. What's up with the Sarlacc?
Yeah, well, the Sarlacc takes a really long time to digest its food. So, it supposedly takes, like 1,000 years to completely digest food, which seems to me like just natural decomposition is going to get you those nutrients a lot quicker. So maybe the Sarlacc is just basically a giant compost heap that whatever falls in there,
I love it.
They're using it, and they're like, maybe they're feeding off the methane and the other carbon source that is released as whatever animals and plant matter. So there's not a lot of plant matter on Tatooine again because it's a desert planet. But they could find some way to fix that carbon and make it into the stuff of their tentacles, teeth, and what have you.
Actually, I think that's pretty viable, especially if you're talking about an ability to break down like all of this junk into usable sources. When we think about microbes and the idea that, like if it gets to it, there are a lot of microorganisms that can take all types of carbon sources, turn them into ATP through a lot of different mechanisms. But then on top of that, there's an ability to basically scavenge. They can scavenge internally. They can break down what they already got and say, we're going to break this down. We're going to get some amino acids. We're going to direct it to something else. But then they can also maybe break down, other products that they receive and say, okay, I need to maintain these tentacles. So, I need some more scaffolding type proteins. I need this, I need some polymerization machinery, things like that. And I think that's actually really, really viable. I think we just only think about that in the context of like microorganisms. But to me, to have a massive organism, and especially when you think about it like if time scale of processes maps with size, then yeah, that 1,000-year, that works for me.
I wonder if its Sarlacc, the Sarlacc. I wonder if its microbiome is actually really heavily populated by fungus.
Ooh, yeah.
What? Yes.
Yeah. I bet it has to, just from sitting around that long.
Mm-hmm.
So something
With
that in mind, I've always been curious, is that Tatooine's natural state, or has it been ravished by the Empire, and then that's what it's desolated now because of that?
Oh, you're wondering if it's the kind of thing where development and other extractive processes have turned it into more of a desert planet?
Right, because that's the economy they have. It's a very scrap-based, extractive economy, how they're living now. And so they're not really living in a way to suggest that that's currently they're sustaining themselves. It's not very sustainable at all.
It's very similar to the economy of Jakku. So yeah, that actually kind of makes me wonder if kind of some of the political and kind of foreign policy decisions of, for example, the Republic and then the Empire are kind of based around those of like the Roman Empire, which is basically like conquer, use the thing, conquer some more, use the thing, conquer some more, use the thing. And when you can't conquer anymore, all of a sudden the whole thing collapses from within.
Yeah, well, one of the things with Jakku, I could definitely see that happening. It's basically a giant junkyard. With Tatooine, though, it has 2 suns. That's a lot of solar radiation. And, I think you can use a lot of solar radiation to, if you have photosynthesis, to build your own food the way plants do. But it's also sapping the moisture. So I think maybe Tatooine is naturally a desert planet. But, then the life forms that live there, it's really unclear how they evolved. Maybe at one time it did have some moisture, and that has since burned away, and they've adapted to be what they are today. Certainly the sand people, they've adapted to wear masks all the time, so that they're constantly filtering out all that sand and stuff that would get in there, which would also be keeping any humidity and moisture that they are breathing out in, similar to, we don't want to mix our sci-fi franchises, but similar to the Fremen and Din.
Yeah, I was thinking, you made me think of that too. That's exactly what I was thinking.
But I also wonder though if there's a lot of storage of water in the form of hydrate. Even with that amount of heat, the question is, how do you make that available? And, so sometimes it can be energy intensive processes, but I'm kind of wondering, if this is where we kind of step into a space of thinking outside of, our mechanistic awareness, right? We thought about all of this in the context of planet Earth. And there's so much that's Earth-like all over the Star Wars galaxy. But I'm kind of like, okay, where do we kind of take the box and stretch it a little bit and say that maybe, just maybe, like we take it's 95 or 80% Earth-like, and then the rest is just something completely novel. So what if there's just a lot of water stored on a micro level? So what we're seeing as sand, maybe every single grain of sand has water that is kind of stored or that's attached or that's bonded to it. And so those things are there, but what we don't see are, fauna and flora that sort of represent having available water sources. That's kind of what I'm wondering.
Well, and if there's enough water bonded to all of that silica, that might explain why things with wheels can still travel on Tatooine, because that is one of my most... Balls do badly in sand. Wheels, balls do badly in sand. Okay. But maybe if there's water in the sand, it's firm enough that like R2D2 can do.
You get more adhesion and it can,
Yeah.
yeah. I also wonder that about, not about water, but just about biological processes that are not Earth-like when we start to talk about space creatures like the Minox. Like you fly in this asteroid field and you hide in an asteroid, and then there are things sucking electricity or whatever the Star Wars equivalent of electricity is out of your ship. What do they do when Han Solo isn't recklessly flying through asteroid fields?
Well, the Minox were living actually inside of that giant worm thing.
Yeah, it's a space.
Oh, that's a good
I
point.
believe it's called a space slug.
Yeah, and
They're like parasitic or symbiotic with the space slug.
Yeah.
And I wonder if actually like the space slug eats ships and the Minox like help break it down so that the space slug can reap nutrients.
But so this is my other question about the space slug. Is it possible that it's also breaking down like materials from asteroids and just space junk in general?
Yeah, like maybe it's an ecosystem engineer to like hollow out its little asteroid where it's living.
Yeah.
Yeah.
but he has big pointy teeth too, and that seems like that might be good for crunching rocks and stuff.
Well, no, but his teeth aren't crushing teeth.
No, they're ripping teeth.
They're
They're
ripping.
ripping teeth or they're gate teeth. So like once it's closed, you can't get out.
Oh, maybe he's like a whale.
Yeah, so it's
Follows the whole thing and pushes out the trash, right?
or
Yeah.
keeps them from running out, because that was one of the things. Like when they realized they weren't inside a rock, they were inside the belly of something. Had it just chunked its mouth down, that would have prevented it. It's more like a gate.
I think it's interesting you bring up something that I didn't think about. They thought they were inside of a rock. And so it could be that it's almost like acting as a vacuum cleaner. So everything goes in, certain things get broken down and are used, or I don't know, does it need a carbon source? It could be like, because I kind of wonder, for it to be inside of an asteroid, are we then talking about things like nickel or just things that are just really beyond our scope as being like metabolically necessary? But when we begin to think about what kind of metals and other elements are found in asteroids, I'm just kind of like,
I just had a thought when you mentioned that, you take things in, then you might excrete some of them out, and Danielle was saying like you might like excrete some of them out. What if the asteroid field is the space slug's poop?
Ooh, whoa.
Interesting.
That might explain the density.
yeah.
But then he's also like feeding where he's pooping, and that's
Like
not
earthworms.
generally a
Like
good
earthworms.
That's what
Earthworms do it all the time. They've got this down.
Yeah, earthworms, eat the soil, poop out soil, live in the soil.
And they actually engineer the soil to become a better ecosystem. So maybe the space slug is doing space a service.
Right. I love the idea that you've got this, perhaps a dust cloud, kind of like what you normally form either planets or asteroid belts out of, but you get this space slug that's kind of straining the substance in the dust cloud and basically pulling out what it needs and pooping out asteroids.
What if it's
Planetary Prevention.
Prada is all tardigrade? I pronounce that different ways every single time I say it, FYI.
Well, we've talked a lot about, in the recent couple of minutes, animals, but we talked about Jakku, which makes me wonder, quarter portions that you do something with it and it's like sad cake in a mug, like it rises up and then you eat it.
I actually looked this up, by the way, trying to find out if it was real. And you can make raised portion bread. There's recipes all over the internet for raised portion bread, and it's a mug cake. That is not what they used for the movie. What they used for the movie was a carefully constructed bladder, and it was like in water, and it had a vacuum under it, and they inflated the bladder and sucked out the water, so it looked like it was just like, isn't that cool?
What I think of is it's a TikTok recipe person who makes cakes out of not flour. Like she uses like water and cornstarch and food coloring, and it magically becomes something that's somewhat substantive. She basically makes meringues
and passes them off as breads. So it's like some sort of moringa powder. It still sounds selfish.
I mean, yeah, I think they describe it as polystarch, which just sounds really unfortunate. Like, it's like styrofoam food.
Like I think about when you pour a soda and like, especially when you're extremely thirsty and you're like, I haven't had a soda in forever. So you fill your glass up with ice and you pour it and you turn around, you put the cap on, and then you come back to the glass and then like all that soda is gone. So sometimes I wonder if it's something like that where almost similar to what you said, Bethany. It's like something is there, but then like slowly you're like maybe it's bubbles that are popping here or something, and you go from like massive to just
It's a big nothing burger. Like trying to bite cotton candy. Like trying to bite cotton candy.
Yeah.
So is it designed to make you feel like maybe you're full, even though basically what you've eaten is a bunch of like powdered air?
That's my hypothesis, especially because Ray also, the other thing she gets with her portion is like something called green meat or something. I think that's what it's called. It's like vegetarian meat and it's green, and I think it's basically supposed to be like Beyond Burger spam.
it's not seasoned at all. None.
She just gotta stay alive. It is
psychological.
Then it just looks hungry.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, actually, it's funny because that was like the first thing where when I was watching The Force Awakens, I had this moment of like being thrown out of the universe. Is when we get to Maz's castle. There's Rey sitting in front of a giant plate of food and talking. If I were her, I'd be like, what? This is the best food I've ever eaten.
What'd you say, huh?
Yeah.
I'll have one of those, please.
Yes.
She did walk right past that big old rotisserie they had going on.
Right? I would have attacked that with my teeth.
Like, she wasn't even snatching food and walking and talking. Like, she was just... But that's actually a huge suspend your belief scene for me, because I just thought, like, this is emotionally unrealistic.
Ooh, okay, so yeah, the other thing about Maz's castle is I was thinking about food in the Star Wars universe, and I realized, so you've got all of these creatures all hanging out. Some are vertebrates, some probably aren't. They're all from all sorts of different biomes, galaxies and stuff. How big is that kitchen? No wonder it's a castle. 3/4 of it must be kitchen, because you've got to keep carbon-based food.
I would argue that you could go to some neighborhood. There's always a great hole in the wall that is just pumping out, never runs out of food, never shuts down. And you're just like, where does it all? I've been in some places and it's a window and you've got like maybe 200 square feet of kitchen. And I'm just like, how is all of this happening back there? I mean, when you look at the menu and then you got like, I got breakfast, dinner, I got burgers, I got salads. I've seen
it. Like, if you're going to have enough variety to like feed, for example, a carbon-based life form, a silicon-based life form, you know, because consider like humans can eat a certain spectrum. So like, say for the humans, you have the fruit platter, which, by the way, I paused when I was rewatching the movie. It contains, hold on, I wrote a list: lemons, apple, dragon fruit, and kiwano melons. The horned melon, yeah.
That's an interesting combination. All of those fruits take work, unless.
And they're all from drastically different ecosystems.
Yeah.
So
what kind of like, would you sit down with any of them and just go in? The interesting thing about an apple, I will say, is that when you break down the sugars in apple, it's the combination of the sugars and the amount. It's almost, you know, it's akin to, and if you've ever had someone who say you drink too much coffee, they'll tend to be like, I just eat an apple. And there's some truth to that, where it's like, it's also kind of like you're getting energy. Like in the process of digesting an apple, you're getting energy. So I'm wondering if there's something within that collective of fruit. Like, it's interesting that even though lemon's not the most bioavailable vitamin C source, we just tend to think.
Well, but I do wonder, like, do space travelers suffer from scurvy?
I would say yes.
I would say yeah.
I would assume so.
yeah,
They're not getting a lot of sunlight because you have to filter out the cosmic rays.
Yeah.
They all have
So also, they're not getting a lot of sunlight, so they're probably really low in vitamin D. You know, like they might, like if you're born on a spaceship, are you subject to rickets unless you get a lot of
Oh, I would imagine that if you're born on a spaceship, they probably just give you like a spoonful of lard and some vitamin D. Make sure you got the fat to break that thing down and use it. You know, make the fat soluble. We need it. We need to. So I just imagine like babies are born and you know
like
they're and it's just like, yeah, here, lick on some lard.
Though I did notice, I actually paused and I was looking at Ray's snack, which she's holding, because I was really fascinated. I was like, what is this thing? It looks so wild. They must have made it just for this. It's half a Honeycrisp apple with a Romanesco broccoli on it. So to give it that like cool little fractal green thing on the top. And so then I looked it up and somebody has made this and they call it like Ray's snack. And
Serve it to your kids.
and you can feed it to your children. It is half an apple that's been hollowed out with some Romanesco broccoli, which goes great with apples, that has been steamed, and like some cheese cubes and like a celery.
Well, I think that is a very well-rounded diet, but I'm like, Honeycrisp apples are expensive. You're not just getting those all over the galaxy.
No.
And you're not finding Romanesco very often either. It has a fairly short growing season.
However, I would say I'm willing to try and make this snack for science.
It actually sounds like a really well-rounded.
I would have to enjoy that snack. That sounds tasty.
Yeah.
It's like the weirdness of Romanesco broccoli with the apple just doesn't work well for me.
Yeah.
Well, I wonder if it's like a cheese board, and if you pair it with the appropriate wines and cheeses, you can kind of connect a flavor journey. Star Wars flavor journey.
Well, and it may be something a little bit like the Thai approach, where you have the bitter from the broccoli and the sweet, and maybe a little bit of tart from the apple, and I don't know, salty from the cheese. So it's kind of all those flavors maybe all there together. But Stephani, I wanted to ask you about the amino acid compatibilities, because there's chirality in amino acids, and how do we know that all of the amino acids that you would be getting on one planet are in the same form that somebody from another planet did? Couldn't you basically just like poison yourself by eating something from another planet?
We got that question on Twitter from Talagath, who basically said, how is everybody eating everything from every planet and not having problems?
Well, I think to a certain extent, unless you just like to think through things like this or stress yourself out, you kind of have to assume, which is a huge assumption to make based, as a biochemist. I'm just kind of like, wait a minute. Because when you think of even the essential amino acids, like the ones your body can't make, so like you kind of tell yourself maybe non-essential amino acids, like you're good if you got the same physiology and biochemistry. But this like, I'm huge. I've been thinking about this for days. I mean, when I say I'm like, this, okay, I can understand some things maybe kind of working, but when you think about on the level of protein mechanism, I'm just kind of
and just the R groups, because like the R groups on amino acids are so flexible.
Yep.
Well, they're flexible, and the other kind of really cool thing to get way too specific is not even just the flexibility of the R groups, but the fact that you can actually have something we call van der Waals overlap. So you don't necessarily say that because an electron is taking up space here and it's a part of this entire structure, that means that two different structures can't overlap. There's so much breadth in proteins and amino acids. Like, it's a beautiful thing to work on. But I'm still curious about what might represent just, if you will, a kink in the armor or a kink in the chain. What's something that is not going to work out? Because like we think about proline, which is it's an amino acid that instead of having an R group like this that's flexible, like what Bethany said, it kind of wraps in on itself. So I'm just going to act like I'm a peptide bond, like a string of amino acids, and it kind of like wraps in on itself in a way that is it makes it very different than the rest of the canonical amino acids. And so I'm just kind of like, what about where proteins have, like, they need a protein. Like, it's really big for having tight turns, and and this is huge when you think of proteins as tiny little machines. And I'm like, okay, Star Wars universe, machines are big. Machines do things, machines don't do things. There's no in between. So I don't know, like, it's fabulous that you asked that, because I'm just like, I've been thinking about this. Like, I've been waking up in the middle of the night, like, drawing on paper, like, what would work?
No, I'm going to be doing it. Oh.
Well, I mean, it's the same thing for me. It was like, crystal.
All of a sudden, you can't get a beta sheet.
Oh,
Right.
I mean, but when you think about not being able to, a beta sheet, you can't, huh? Like, these are viable.
These are the building blocks of proteins. You can't.
But what we have found is that, people make non-canonical. You can either make them, and some of them have been found in nature, and they fit in. What's really cool is when you get into the work where they say, like, does this change the function? And sometimes it does, like, a little bit. I think the other thing that's really cool, I had a really awesome dissertation project. And one of the questions I was asking was kind of like, if you exchange different amino acids with the same position, do you get differences? And yes, you do. So, like, that's why this is, like, really curious for me, because I'm just kind of like, my brain is going off, because I'm thinking about shapes. I'm thinking about, like, what if other elements are a part of the R groups, and, like, what does that mean? Because we have a small number of sulfur-containing amino acids. What if now we're thinking about all these other elements that can be amino acids? I'm like, whoa.
It changes the whole game.
It changes the game. I mean, because when you talk about metals, and this is another really curious thing about different planets, it's like metal availability.
Yep.
Magnesium, calcium, potassium. What if it's just metals that we've never even heard of, and we think we're all geniuses and brilliant and experts, and then it's just a whole nother metal group out there, and we're like, well, how are our amino acids supposed to bind these metals so that enzymes can do their business?
Or what if there's a planet with none of these particular things? Like, for example, what if you're dealing with a planet without potassium? If you don't have potassium, your neurons do not fire. Not a thing. Gone, done, bye.
Well, and then there's the question of a planet like Crete, which is salt. It's made of salt. I mean, those crystal foxes, I mean, they're excreting these things, so they must be ingesting a lot of salt. So, what happens to their kidneys? What happens to their blood pressure? How do they regulate that?
But do they have that? Like, if you think about that, is that even important for them to live anymore? Like, maybe that's not a part of it.
Well, when you think about potentially the fact, we think of organisms in a very fixed way. I mean, even when we think about all the amazing things that we find every day on Earth. But I think we're still, even with that, we're kind of stuck with kind of like this humanoid focus, cardiovascular system, nervous system, like all of that. And it's really weird, because maybe we're thinking of exchanges where, the dominant species are more like insects, or the dominant species are more like worms, or even kind of like as we were talking about space slugs, where like maybe that dominant species is more like earthworms and sort of,
they can do a lot of stuff like how exoskeletons work. So they have really high surface areas, so they can do a lot of exchange without an internal mechanism. They didn't need to evolve all this internal machinery. Everything's happening at the surface or just below the surface. We were looking at the salt foxes thinking all those little crystals were akin to their fur, but maybe if it wasn't.
I was wondering if it was a symbiotic relationship with diatoms.
They could be that, or every facet is also a place of exchange. Like,
well, you know what's really cool about
you have a fractal like that drastically increases your surface area for gas exchange.
Yeah,
but it could also be that a combination, because the other thing we haven't gotten to here is like the idea of like bacteria and other microorganisms, that they grow and they work together, and so you have these layers. You have essentially like sugars that are just excreted to kind of not just build a protective layer, but they help them communicate between their environment and between each other. And then you even see microorganisms that form like fruiting bodies, almost like plants. And so in a lot of ways, I'm just kind of like, well, maybe that's what this is when we're seeing microorganisms grow together, and they're kind of functioning, like you said, like we're a part of the exchange system. We are a part of the protective layer. So like instead of skin, even though we have microorganisms on our skin that help us, help protect us, maybe it's just a lot thicker of a layer, maybe they just built up and stuck together and and it's worked well. So
well, I just love what you mentioned, that we have kind of this like animal fixation and this idea that they're like organs. But it also occurs to me that we're kind of like cellist. Like we have this idea that you require DNA that replicates itself. I mean, you do need a molecule that replicates itself, but like, DNA that's in a membrane, and then you have like organelles or like things inside the membrane, and the whole thing functions together. I mean, that's just the way we do it. That's not the way that other systems necessarily have to do it.
Which goes back to who knows, they probably don't really need to eat much in Star Wars, which I don't think they actually eat much, and maybe this is why. Everything's been happening at a microscopic microbiome level, all on the outside. They're just absorbing what they need. It's all happening.
And what if a lot of these planets have their own version of like primordial soup, where for organisms haven't formed, right? And it's like, it's still the chicken and the egg. It's like, did these proteins form first, or what happens? But either way, like there's just globs of protein, they're just doing things. What if it's just like that is kind of what's dominating, and every different systems have that version? And basically what happened is somebody from a different system came in and said, I can get a lot of what I need, and maybe all you need is a little primordial soup, at 5 years old and 10 years old and 15 years old.
Now I'm just wondering how great it would be to be a scientist in the Star Wars universe, because you just find like a planet that's still at the primordial soup stage, and you can just observe it from like day zero.
Oh my God, that would, that's really cool. Some of these spaceships have labs on them.
Yes.
Because when you think about it, you automatically have PPE on most of the time. Han Solo, I don't know what I never saw him in complete, well, he was, but that was just by necessity. But in general, maybe Mandalorians are scientists, and that's why they're like completely PPE all the time.
Love it.
And yes, we totally are. That is the way.
Yeah. Socially distancing is the way.
Oh my goodness, you were born for this.
All right, we're running low on time. I have two things I want to check on. The first is we've talked about people maybe don't eat a lot in the Star Wars universe, but we know they drink, and what they drink is colored milk. What the hey?
We must talk about
The blue-green milk.
Well, I drank blue milk as a kid.
Wait, tell us about this.
Well, so when I was a kid growing up in the 90s, as one did, my mom would get skim milk, and then I would have like the whole milk or the 2%, but she would get skim milk because this was the 90s and fat was evil. But the skim milk was always vaguely blue tinted because it was so thin. And so when I was a kid, I would always ask for the blue milk. So that was what adults.
You got actual blue milk because of light backscatter off of the colloids. I love that.
And so like maybe it's just skim milk.
It's just light refraction.
I wonder if green milk is actually like, for example, like milk, for example, can excrete lots of things that a fetus needs. Like a mammal makes milk to provide its baby or fetus or whatever with things that it needs. And so I wonder if the giant space walrus, whatever that thing is that makes the green milk, which in my head is a space walrus, is, for example, maybe has some sort of photosynthetic abilities and needs to provide chloroplasts, seed its baby with chloroplasts, and that's why the milk is green. It's actually like chloroplast seeding.
Well, I was thinking it was more from its diet, that it was probably like feeding on kelp or something like that. It had kind of a long proboscis, and with the mammaries that it has and everything, it probably has I'm thinking maybe somewhat similar physiology to other ruminants. And So it's probably eating some plant matter. And since there's not a lot on the island itself, I'm thinking probably in the sea around it, there's probably a lot of kelp, which would be green, and then maybe that just kind of filters into the milk.
Maybe it's not very good at like hindgut fermentation, so there's a lot of like unbroken down cell walls.
Right.
Ooh, so what if, see, I was also thinking about oxidation states of different metals. And, different metals can be different colors in solution. But then the other thing is, like, when you think about milk, it's not homogeneous the way we think about it. Like, it's homogenized when we consume it because somehow, things have to be made pretty for us. But it's, what if this is really a heterogeneous mixture and somehow the oxidation state of the metals, even it could be iron 2+ can be green in solution, copper, or it could be a mixture. It could also be a mixture of metals where, it's just really, dense in metals and salts. And so maybe just the right form kind of makes it pop off. I mean, the other thing I thought about was like whether there were crystalline substances in the milk. So you just had a crystal structure that was like something similar to what we see with emeralds, where it's really like a dislocation in the crystal structure, right? Or ideally, something not carbon is kind of in one of the points of the crystal, so that actually can make it look green, which fits both the idea of eating a lot of kelp to me, and then also getting a lot of substance from the ocean, which I'm kind of like, I need some details. What's the key?
Yeah. I was just thinking, what if, for example, the green is a pigment? So, for example, like chlorophyll is a pigment, and we see it as green because green is the color it reflects back, right? It absorbs red and blue, and we see the green. And so what if they just happen to produce a pigment in their milk that makes it seem green, and it's just, like food coloring for babies?
That's what actually is. There's something similar to heme that's green. It's found in worms. It's I always get this word wrong. It's chlorotorin.
Yeah, I was going to say that. I was thinking that one too, because you see it in a lot of shellfish.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, that's perfect.
Yeah, shellfish.
If like the giant space walrus is actually a mollusk.
No, but if it's
So I was
going to say, we're saying milk because, like you said, we're in our own head, and that's the only thing we can liken it to. Mm-hmm. It's some sort of fluid. It's coming from a gland, but it may not be milk proper. Like, it's still some sort of nutritive food, but it may be nothing. So, like, what makes milk, like from memories, is its fat content. Mm-hmm. And we don't know if it had fat in it or not. Like, we don't know if it's milk proper or just a fluid. But I'm going to go with the eating shellfish, and that's where blue comes from. And it just doesn't get broken down. Blue color would make
like the pink flamingos. I also like the idea, because all of this sounds really tasty, that Luke is that guy at Trader Joe's singing the praises of almond milk with wheatgrass. Like, that's what he's doing. It's like, don't you want some of this?
And what if that's all it was for the movie? I bet that's all. It was oat milk. Wasn't even almond milk. It was oat milk with wheatgrass.
You got to take your own wheat because they don't care.
All right. Closing question. So we had Elf Grove and Tonight Atomic on Twitter asked very similar things. Elf Grove wanted to know what restaurant near the convention you would take the child. Tonight Atomic was more specific. Like, what are you going to order Baby Yoda at Taco Bell?
With regards to restaurants near the convention center, you're implying that I actually eat during Dragon Con and leave the convention center, neither of which are the case.
It's like whatever the vendor is outside of this session.
Pizza and hot dog. That I was gonna be worse. I was be like, whatever Steven and his wife eat, because they come with so much food.
We know we're
I
not
always
leaving.
go to like CVS, the CVS that's like in the underground shopping mall when I get there, and pick up a huge pile of snacks. So me and Baby Yoda are living on Cliff Bars.
Yeah, because I feel like the only thing you could get if you have to give this baby bone and meat, then you can only go to the hope the hotel kitchen is open and that they at least have like a wing platter.
But
Like,
you know what though?
you like ranch and blue cheese.
Well, if you really
Are
need
you
to
taking the Hooters, I guess?
The red or scraps. It's gonna be scrap bones laying out everywhere.
Yeah.
No,
You
like
go
by
after
the time,
every
by the
meal
time I'm
and
done
try
with
to get the
Dragon
scraps
Con,
from the
I'm like
kitchen.
that. I'm like that giant animal in the trash compactor in episode 4. Like I'll just eat anything.
Oh, I was eating all the way up the highway home. I was stopping every other exit. Like, ooh, there's a Jacob.
You're right. We do not a lot of eating. And then they get us at 2 a.m. with those $20 horrible pizzas selling outside.
I mean,
They're the
I
only thing we can get.
miss Dragon Con a lot, but I do not miss that pizza.
So there we go. He's eating the pizza in the Hilton lobby at 2 a.m. that he overpaid. That's what we're feeding Baby Yoda. That seems like an appropriate Dragon Con place to stop. Thank you to Danielle and Tina and Bethany and Stephanie. And on behalf of all of us, thank y'all for watching and enjoy your colored milk. Thank you very much.